Hello, and welcome back to Practically Political. It is June 4th, 2025. Great to have you with us. I am joined by my partners in crime, as always, Kurt Bardella and Ashley Davis. And as always, there's plenty to talk about. So, the big, beautiful bill, which I like to refer to in the three B's format as the big budget buster, is going to go to the Senate. They want to pass it by July 4th. And I have to say, just to have a little catharsis here, the unabashed lying that is going on from our speaker, from Russ Vought, the director of the management and budget. At least, it's like the old Soviet Union. They just lie without feeling any consequence. There'll be no cuts in Medicaid. We're not doing anything to reduce benefits. It's just blatant mendacity, and I hope they will be held accountable. And then you have the other side of the crowd, the Ron Johnsons and the Ron Pauls that are saying we need to cut more spending, which of course is totally disingenuous, because if they really cared about the budget, they would say, hey, as the president did, why don't we let the top tax rate go up from 37 to 39.6? Wow, that's a real huge hit to people. And then everyone has to pay their share, but of course they can't do that. So anyway, thank you for my vent, but you folks are more attuned to what's going on. You spend more time on the Hill than I. So Ashley, why don't we start with you? Of the people you've been talking to, where things stand? What's the because they can afford to
Yeah,
lose
of,
three
of
votes
course
in the
that's
Senate,
unrelated
obviously.
to this legislation, but
Right, and you have to think automatically that they're gonna lose one. So you have Rand Paul that's never gonna vote for anything that raises the debt ceiling. So you now have 2 votes left that you can lose, and there's all different sorts of things that conflict with various different people. So let's start with the budget. You have Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, who want to go back to pre-COVID levels of funding, which is we should. We borrowed $7 trillion to pay for COVID, and then we haven't been able to go back. I mean, it's ridiculous. But so Ron Johnson, as of right now, is a no. I think he probably gets some concessions and gets there at some point. You have Josh Hawley. I don't think, yeah, Mitch McConnell's not raising taxes, so I think he's going to be fine. I think he obviously voted a few times against nominees, etc. But at the end of the day, he's a conservative. So and going back to your statement, Dave, I do understand about the president saying raising the tax rate for the wealthiest individuals. It makes sense. I just don't. Can you imagine what happens politically, Kurt? You would be like starting to cut ads all day long on Republicans raising taxes. So just to kind of finish this out, you have Josh Hawley that's concerned about Medicaid. You have Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski that's concerned about Medicaid. And then you have some others that are concerned about the green tax credits, but I don't think that's going to hold up a bill. So there's a lot of moving parts, but the longer it stays out there, the longer, I'm sorry, there's a ambulance behind me, but the
Ashley's
longer
under
it's,
arrest.
I'm under, the longer we're out there, the longer this bill stays out there, the harder it is it's going to be able to pass. So that's why he has the goal of putting it on the floor the week of June 23rd,
Yeah,
meaning Thune.
yeah. No, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think with all the hullabaloo that we're seeing now, with Elon Musk particularly becoming so vocal about it, this three-way war he's in now on X with John Thune and with Speaker Johnson. Um, will that move the needle in any way at all? We're about to see, what the true nature of Elon Musk's political influence is. Will be It'll be very revealing to see how this plays out that way, and how actual real this divide between him and Trump is, and what the manifestation of that will be. I mean, I think it could have longer term some pretty big implications when you look at the outsized role that Elon has had, um, in the first 6 months of the Trump presidency, certainly as the most visible surrogate that the president has had, really in the last year. If this bill goes forward, despite the fact of all the things that Elon's now tweeting and saying are negative about it, it's pretty neutering for Elon Musk. And Elon strikes me as a guy who won't take it very well. The perception that he's lost sway or has no real influence or power for all the money he spent for owning X, that at the end of the day you can cry about it online, but it wouldn't change substantively the outcome of the bill. I think that's kind of the more interesting thing here, and perhaps the most consequential thing politically will be like, what happens if Trump and Musk implode? I have said the entire time since that relationship began, it is inevitable that they will end on opposite sides. Two people of this egomaniacal, narcissistic driven way cannot coexist with each other for very long. And this could be the beginning of that. Almost every single person who has ever been in Donald Trump's orbit ends up as his adversary or enemy over the course of his relationship. There are very few people who end up long term being on his side and staying on his side. You can go back and look at the list of people who have worked with him, from his fixer Michael Cohen to his first Attorney General Jeff Sessions to his own Vice President Mike Pence. It usually doesn't end well with Donald Trump, and I just wonder if what we're seeing because of this bill and because of the way Elon Musk is now publicly railing against it, if that will carry over beyond just the
Well, it's
specific
very
policy
interesting
fight.
you mentioned that, Kurt, because what's different about Elon is that, and I have to give the president credit, which I do when he deserves it, that his political instincts are really good. Because what's different about Elon is a he's got obviously huge amounts of money, and it's so funny because it's a sad statement of America that just because someone has so much money, if he were worth, say, even a billion or half a billion, he wouldn't be getting this kind of reverence. His behavior, the drug-addled performances, the just ridiculous behavior. But the president realizes, hey, here's a guy who's got all this money. We need him to fund our candidates. Plus, he has the most incredibly powerful social media platform. So he's not just like any other person that gets banished. Trump has got to keep him on his good side because it could really be damaging for both the president himself and the party. So I thought that farewell conference in the White House was very revealing because he gave him that key in that cheesy box, which I thought was kind of demeaning. But you could see how he's really got to walk the tightrope here. And so the question is, back to what you're saying, Kurt, is even given all those efforts, given how unpredictable, how really what man boys they both are, is that going to go off the rails? And I think yes, the chances of it are pretty high.
So I disagree with you a little bit on this because I actually think they have a different relationship. I don't think it's as transactional. I think along the way, I think at the beginning it was transactional, but I think along the way there's some sort of father son type of relationship there more than others. And so you kind of see it. You kind of see it with how he is with X, the Sun, not X, the social media platform. But I think that you see all these different dynamics and they've spent a lot of time together. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I think is interesting is you have Stephen Miller doing this now, is trying to explain to Elon kind of the budgetary process of what's happening. So, and so obviously David Sachs did the same thing. They're confusing kind of appropriations with kind of reconciliation process. And so, but this is like so inside baseball in Washington. No one else is watching this. They're just really seeing that Elon's coming out against the president, and that's the
Right.
story.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the key will be to, uh, for Republicans who have spent almost as long as I can remember, me being a former Republican, by the way, that fiscal responsibility, cutting the debt and deficit, balanced budgets have been hallmarks of Republican conservatism for as long as I can remember. And even with the new CBO scoring coming out and saying like, yeah, this is going to add $1.7 trillion to the debt deficit. I don't know how anyone that claims to be Republican and claims to care about fiscal responsibility to look at this bill and think it is responsible to pass it. There's this, oh, don't worry, the money that we'll make from this over the next 10 years will offset that the deficit numbers. That's never how it actually ends up happening, by the way. Like people use accounting gimmicks all the time to justify government spending. And all that we've seen over the last 3 decades is government spending go up, the debt go up, and we have not been anywhere near close to living within our means as a government, since the 90s. And so I just think that this bill really is the death of fiscal conservatism being a hallmark principle of the
Well, I
Republican
would push
Party.
back.
So
No,
can I just
I would
go
push back
ahead?
a little
Go
bit,
ahead.
saying that I think that even during Reagan, because Reagan did honestly try to reduce spending, he cut, he vetoed 22 spending bills, he agreed to raise taxes. But once you got into the George W. Bush era, Republicans only cared about the deficit when Democrats were in control. So I think over the last 25 years, I don't think there's been any of that. And when you look at and how many times have we been through this? Every time there's a Republican tax cut proposed, we always hear, "Oh, it's dynamic. Look at the Laffer curve. It's going to pay for itself. It's going to create so much growth. Don't listen to the the CBO. Their scoring is static. It's not dynamic. They don't take into account all the growth that's going to happen." We've heard that every time. Every time it's been a budget buster. At least with 1981 and 2001, you could argue that the economy was slowing down. But the 2017 tax cut was the biggest waste of all because they cut taxes when the economy was healthy. That's when you raise taxes. You cut taxes when the economy is in recession. In recession, you raise them when it's recovering or when it's doing well. Bill Clinton dispelled all these supply side theories. If you remember his tax cut in 1992, everyone from Newt Gingrich on down said it was going to torpedo the economy. We had the biggest boom in history. So it's just, then they know it's not true. It's an upward redistribution of wealth. And as a pragmatist, I have no problem celebrating wealth. That's what made this country great. I have no problem with tax cuts, but just transferring a lot of money, this bill, it transfers money from poor to rich. It transfers money from young to old. And it's like the bill of the past, not a bill of the future. It's just 360 degrees of wrong.
So on that note, Dave, I have a serious question though. So 75% of our budget is entitlements and defense. Okay. So let's take off defense because everyone, yes. And everyone pretty much agrees we should have a good defense budget. So Republicans are trying to make some sort of cuts to Medicaid in regards to work requirements, undocumented individuals that are on Medicaid. And they're getting crucified for doing that. Okay. So get it. Politically, I get it 100%. But how do we get ourselves out of this mess? Or do we just go broke and then it just doesn't matter because there's no more money? Or do we start printing money
Well,
again and then there's
I think the
inflation
problem
and,
is in
all this stuff? I
Well,
don't know the
Americans
answer.
love entitlements, and in some ways, it's all of us as voters that have basically okayed both parties continuously kicking the can down the road. We haven't held our political system accountable, and because everyone likes everyone likes handouts. People likes to get free stuff, and that's human nature. But that's why I think the only way that it would work is and this is how it's been done before, it has to be a bipartisan effort so both parties can take cover. And it's got to be everybody sacrifices somehow. You got to have tax increases. You have to have benefit cuts. You have to have a lot of stuff. But these work requirements, okay, they tried them in Arkansas. Okay, and they made that in 18 with 18,000 people. It didn't reduce cost. And I think the only state in the country now that has a work requirement is Georgia. And I think even if you talk to some people there, it's been a mixed bag at best. Yes, I think that undocumented people should not receive health care. And yes, you should weed out fraud, waste, and abuse. But the work requirement, I think, is just a red herring. What do you?
I mean, here's the thing that always gets me about the conversation of who should or should not get coverage. It doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, if you need emergency room treatment, you're going to go to the ER, and they have a duty of care to treat you, and that costs way more money doing it that way than if it's done under the guise of some kind of insurance plan. It's like the old adage of, yes, illegal immigrants shouldn't have a driver's license and shouldn't be able to get car insurance, but if you get hit by a car by an illegal immigrant, like it's going to cost you way more money than having that protection. And so I've never understood the argument of, oh, we're going to take these people off health insurance and somehow costs will go down. Like, no, they won't. They're going to go up because those people are still going to have to get care at some point, and we're just going to end up paying that out of taxpayer dollars anyway, and it will cost us way more money because it's not a pre-negotiated rate. It's an emergency room rate, which we all know is way more expensive if you have to go to the ER. unexpectedly than if you have normal health insurance and are able to go through a plan where even the cost of your prescription drugs are already pre-negotiated and accepted. So I've never looked at that particular piece of the pie as a cost savings. That's a great political talking point. Yes, everyone would fundamentally agree. Do you think it's right that illegal immigrants have health care? No, of course, no one thinks that they should. But the economic reality around that is, I think, very different, and people don't always realize that. And so it's kind of smoke and mirrors budgeting that Republicans often play with that particular talking point. Um, I think that Ashley's right. There's no viable way to talk about actually getting into some semblance of fiscal responsibility without dealing with entitlements openly and honestly. I'm of a generation that understands Social Security ain't going to be there for me by the time I get there. I am paying into a system I will never see a dollar of return on. Some might call that a Ponzi scheme. My former boss, Daryl Issa, certainly did. And so we need to account for that in some way. We are all still acting like it's 1980 and 1970, and that all these entitlements will be there the way that we've expected them to, the way that they'll be there for our parents. But they're not going to be there for people of my generation. So why are we even paying into it at this point? There's no point.
Kurt, can I tell you something very sad about the 80s you just brought up? So someone tweeted or X'd me last week that said the 80s are calling and they want their hair back. They may probably think I have nice
Oh,
hair,
Wow,
you
I
have
do.
great hair. That's just
No,
mean. Come
I don't
on.
even get, I don't even get that. But
meaning that my hair is
no,
from the
I
80s and
respond.
that I'm
I
wearing it
disagree.
I
now.
don't think it is.
I think the
Obviously, it hit a
80s.
Well,
chord
it's
in me, Kurt
much.
and Dave.
I, the 80s were a time of big hair,
Yeah.
MTV, rock bands. Like, that's
And
not
they
what
were
you
also,
have.
in
That's
terms of the cultural
ridiculous.
contributions to the country, they were a pretty vapid. But I want to get back to what you said about healthcare, because I think it's true. We don't use more in this country; we just pay more. And one of the main reasons is because our system is so privatized. We have about a 22% overhead. In France, I think it's 2.5%. And I think the reason that everyone should have healthcare is not because I'm a flaming liberal, but just because it's cheaper. I haven't seen the only healthcare systems I've seen that even come close to holding costs down to the rate of inflation. You have the 80% of the population that's healthy subsidizing the 20% of the population that is sick. And that is the model that works. That's why you have to have, i.e., individual mandate, which was created by the Heritage Foundation, and which Mitt Romney embraced, and so did conservatives until Obama picked it up. That's important. You have to have healthy people paying into the system. Otherwise, you have what economists call adverse selection, and you're only insuring six people, and the whole thing collapses. So, I agree our healthcare system has a lot of problems, but picking poor people off is not going to solve it.
No, it's gonna exacerbate it. It's gonna be it's just more expensive. If you don't have quality care and you get sick, you're only gonna get sicker, which is only gonna ultimately cost us more money to treat you. So it's like, I agree. It is and it's not a liberal, progressive, or Democrat, Republican. It is actually in everyone's best interest that everybody have health care.
What do you guys think about this most favored nation proposal that the president has? Do you know about it?
What is that?
So it's like prescription drugs, really. So pharma hates it. They're like up in arms because it's really saying in some of our government programs, especially that he can control,
Okay.
that you pay what the amount of the foreign country's paying. So we can't get charged more in the US than they do in Germany, for example. And so, of course, that's a very populist issue, right? I mean, everyone would agree on its head that, but it's like farmers like, "Zzz."
Yeah, I mean, I get the idea that, like, hey, a tablet of Advil should cost the same thing here as it does in any country in the world, and any country in the world should pay the same thing that we pay, I suppose. I could see why pharma hates that from a business model standpoint. Um, but I think fundamentally, it's like, yeah, I think there's something again that's a
Well, this
very
isn't Advil though. This is like insulin. Like this is everything.
sure. Sure, again, I kind of feel that way. Like, I mean, not all economies are created equal, not all currencies are created equal. But in general, yeah, we're all human beings living on this planet. It should not cost us more. We should not be paying a higher premium just because we're
Yeah,
Americans, I
I
guess.
think the argument that, and I'm not saying I support this argument, but the argument that comes from the business side as well, it's easy for those other countries to charge less because they're not the ones that develop the drugs. They don't have all the research and all the, the R&D costs that we have. I think a very simple solution would be you simply have drug companies say it's going to cost us how many billions of dollars to develop this drug, the marketing costs, the R&D costs, and we think it's fair to make a certain amount of profit. So you get to charge a certain amount until you reach those goals. Then after that, you sell it at a generic price. And the cost that to me is very fair because big pharma, I go back and forth on big pharma because yes, they've done a lot of things that are not honorable, and you can criticize them in a lot of ways. But we're the only country that's developing these blockbuster drugs, and that's why all this Doge stuff. And I have to say, that's one of the nice things about Elon leaving because it shows once again what an abysmal failure Doge was, even by his own standards. But cutting back all this medical research, this is really attacking the lifeblood of our innovation.
All I'll say is I don't know too many pharmaceutical companies that are hurting economically. They seem to always find a way to recoup their costs and make a buck. So, like, they'll be just fine no matter what, I suspect. Um, I do agree with you though that like not investing in R&D, not investing, in and using this war on our education institutions to pull back funding for some of these R&D things and HIV and AIDS and cancer. It's like why that makes no sense to me from a humanity standpoint, from a so-called Christian standpoint, which these people all claim to be, by the way, and talk about all the time, as well as just from an economic standpoint, the ability to foster the next line of life-saving drugs is both the right thing to do from a human standpoint, but it's also incredibly profitable for our country too. So failing to invest in the future. Um, will only cost us more money later on. And if someone else does it, by the way, from another country, then we're at their mercy too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There's so much despondent news these days. So I want to move on to something very positive. I have to say, I don't think I've ever been more satisfied in recent memory, or frankly, more impressed with a military move than that drone operation that Ukraine pulled off on Russia, where they destroyed over a third of all their high capacity bombers, which by the way, they're not able to rebuild. And it was just absolutely ingenious. I put this up with the exploding pagers with for Hezbollah.
Yeah,
Just
the
the
Oh
pagers.
sheer
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
ingenuity of it. It really is.
People argue that this one was even
Yes.
much more debilitating than even the pagers, but I think that did you see, Dave, in the last 45 minutes, I would say, that the president and Putin spoke for about an hour and a
No,
half,
I
and
didn't hear that.
so yeah, and the president I guess Putin told the president that he must retaliate against what happened, and pretty much, like, peace in Ukraine is, like, not happening.
Well, that was always the case. What I love what's going on with Putin. All of a sudden, he's become this monster. All of a sudden, he doesn't want peace. All of a sudden, he's killing. He's been there. He's been there the whole time. I think that the question is, will President Trump finally put some bite behind his bark in terms of sanctions? Because I think he hates being viewed as a failure. He hates being viewed as someone who can't keep his promises. And this ending the war in a day was a big one. And he's also, I think, himself starting to see that Putin is playing him. So we'll see. I don't.
I don't think Congress gives Ukraine more money. I just don't. I don't think they authorize it. I agree with you, Dave, that well, remember, and I think I've said this before. Remember, my old boss said he saw Putin's soul through his eyes. I mean, so he thought differently of him too. You're exactly right. I mean, I'm actually really scared to see what the retaliation is going to be from Russia on this, but also just for the people from a humanitarian perspective. But I also think that, how I think the sanctions bill would get introduced at some point, but there is just not any political favor here for spending any more money with them.
Yeah. Well, I do think though the success of Zelensky's operation it illustrates, I think, how absolutely stupid Trump and Vance look after what they did to him in the Oval Office. After Trump going, "You don't have the cards. You don't have the cards," and that whole shtick. And it's like Zelensky's sitting there going, "Oh, I got cards. I'm just not going to broadcast them on national television like a moron because that's not how military strategy works, you dumbass." And and Zelensky has shown like he is a effective, brilliant, and capable leader, commander in chief in his own right. The fact that this operation was pulled off, planned for a year and a half, and executed flawlessly, and struck very real, legitimate damage to Russia's military. It is a huge ego wound for Putin, which is why I agree with Ashley. I'm very concerned about what the retaliation will be. Um, I do think it's possible that the retaliation is so draconian and so brutal that it could serve to rally uh, more of a political appetite to support Ukraine, not just here, but around the world, depending on how far Putin goes. And so, it will come with a tremendous human cost, but it might be the thing that Ukraine needs to get a second wind of support to
And
continue
Donald
this
Trump
battle.
loves winners. He loves strength, and so this may boost Zelensky's stock a little bit in him. But I do agree. I'm I'd say I'm not quite sure that the funding won't get more funding won't get approved, but I think there's a good chance that it won't. But really, for me, the key issue is even if they don't approve the funding, as long as they continue to allow intelligence sharing and cooperation on other fronts, then I think, and intelligence sharing, and they allowed Europe to transfer weapons that they would buy from us and then give to you. So
Hmm.
it's
Yeah, I think they
two
are
things
allowing that
that I
as of
think
right
Ukraine can
now.
still
Yeah.
survive, even if we don't give them additional funding. But I don't know what you folks think.
Yeah, no, I think they do allow that nowadays. But here's the thing, Kurt, going back to your point for a second, there is absolutely no way that the Ukraine did that on their own for the last year and a half. So I would assume that the United States, even though they were saying that we weren't involved at all, I'm assuming we would probably give them some direction. There's very few countries that can pull that off, what they did. I mean, Israel's one. They're, have a lot going on themselves. So
Yeah. 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 Again, I think that there's more, at least international support for Zelensky, and intelligence sharing and resource sharing, even if some of it's dried up a little bit on our end. I do think other nations, especially in the European Union, are stepping up behind the scenes and will continue to do so. And again, I think that whatever Putin does, I'll put it this way: the worse it is in terms of retaliation, the more support that will engender for Ukraine, I suspect,
Yeah,
internationally.
I think that's absolutely true. Well, folks, I think we're gonna have to leave it there. Always so much more to talk about than we have time for. But it's been another great show, and I thank all of you for joining us. And we will see you next time on Practically Political. For Kurt Bardella and for Ashley Davis, I'm Dave Spencer saying thanks so much for joining us.